Welcome to the Scalable Real Estate Investing Podcast, where we discuss the most scalable strategies, tools, and approaches to successfully invest in real estate. Learn how to make the most impact of your time, automate your real estate investing business, find off-market deals with minimum time invested, and leverage your capital to create as many income streams as possible so that you can achieve true financial independence. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Mason Clement. Hi, Scalable Investors. Before we get into today's episode, I'd like to tell you about a group that I'm a part of called HiveMind. If you're serious about taking the next step in your real estate investing career, then this is definitely a group that you need to join. Some of our members are making $90,000 and more per month, and as much as $300,000 on just one deal. And at the same time, you don't have to spend thousands of dollars like you typically would joining other mastermind groups. This is only $99 per month. And when you join, you'll gain access to a robust integrated CRM software that allows you to track your leads, run automated triggers, and ultimately scale your marketing efforts. So the difference here is that you're not left high and dry, but gain access to a support network that allows you to use that tool and learn from other more experienced real estate investors. So to learn more, go to scalablerei.com/HiveMind. That's HIVEMIND. Thanks a lot. Let's get into the episode. Hi, Scalable Investors. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Scalable Real Estate Investing. I'm your host, Mason Clement, and today we have with us Brian Spear, who is co-founder of Sunrise Capital Investors. You might remember Kevin Buff on an earlier episode. He's the other co-founder and partner in crime. So today we're going to speak with Brian about basically everything that he's done with raising tens of millions of dollars, investing in mobile home parks and other really interesting asset classes. And really just want to jump into things. I'm excited to have him on the show. And Brian, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing very well, man. I always like to say I never had a bad day in my life, right? Things could be worse. Life is good. Had a lot of time with some friends and family over this past weekend, with a hullabaloo with COVID, man. Unfortunately had a family member pass away during COVID, and we couldn't do a funeral during that interim phase. So, after about a year, we were able to do a celebration of life, a new sort of journey, but it was actually very nice. It was an opportunity to get friends and family together, and those are always fun. So life is good, man.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your loss. I have a childhood friend, actually. I just sent him a card the other day because his mother had passed from COVID. So it's really unfortunate,
I agree. We're all working through it. We're all working through it. So hopefully we'll kind of continue to progress month over month here. Kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. So it's only getting better from here on out.
Yeah, I agree. It can only get worse before it gets better. And how can something be good without having the bad in there as well?
I agree.
So what I like to have every guest on the show do is just first talk about their background and how they got involved in real estate and what brought them to really today, their whole journey up to talking to me.
Fair enough. I'll try to be brief, right? We could drone on for hours, but in short, I didn't grow up in a very affluent environment. Parents got divorced when I was super young. And right now today, Sunrise Capital Investors, we own mobile home parks across the eastern half of the country, about 14 different states. But my very first experience with mobile home parks was when I lived in one when I was 10 years old. Parents got divorced. Dad moved to Gary, Indiana. Mom moved to the south side of Chicago and lived in a mobile home. It was just the best decision at that time for her and her family as a single mom, as opposed to living in a cramped apartment. She chose to, live in a 3-bed detached single family style home, 1,100 square feet. At a very affordable rate. It was about a $30,000 home all in at that time. And that was my first experience. But from that early age, knowing that we didn't have a ton growing up, I always wanted to do something to try to change my family tree in one generation. I was willing to work pretty hard to do that. And when you're that young, it's all, and you're trying to get out of that environment, it's I need money. What question do you ask? How do I get money? I need a good job. How do I get a good job? I need a good degree. How do I get a degree? I don't have any money to go buy one. Well, I had better go find some scholarships. So I worked really hard academically and athletically, and ended up getting a bunch of different scholarships all over the country to a lot of different places, and landed at the University of Kentucky, where I earned not only an academic scholarship, but also athletic scholarship to play baseball there. Wasn't tall enough to play basketball, wasn't strong enough to play football. But in baseball, you can pretty much be any size and shape. You work pretty hard. I taught myself how to hit both right-handed and left-handed so that I could get seen by more scouts. So ultimately was able to earn an athletic scholarship as well. Ended up getting my business degree while I was there. We had a great, great run. And then upon graduating, it was just truly setting about that financial foundation again. The entire purpose was to try to go change that family tree. So I took the job that ultimately was afforded me the opportunity to build the highest pile of cash that I possibly could. Had a few different job offers after school, was one step beneath academic All-American, so had an opportunity to take a couple of decent picks of the litter, and chose a job that afforded me an opportunity to start building piles of cash, all the while with the intent to turn them into streams of income. I'd learned about compound interest. I knew that I wanted to stock away as much money as I possibly could, as early as I possibly could, to take advantage of that compound interest over the many decades. And I thought about knocking that out. By the time that I was in my mid-20s, had built up a pretty healthy size of dry powder and wanted to pivot to commercial real estate. After vetting a handful of different folks, I knew that I wanted to get into commercial real estate, but I couldn't do it on my own. I needed to partner with somebody who had complementary skill sets. So reached out to a handful of different people and ultimately decided to move forward with a gentleman today that I'm proud to say is my partner. You mentioned him earlier, a gentleman by the name of Kevin Bupp, phenomenal human being. Is a handful of years older than me. And I knew that with his background, if I could be where he was a handful of years from now, I would consider myself successful. So I basically reached out to him and I said, hey, bud, I got an offer you can't refuse. I'm going to come down to Florida. I'm going to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. I'm going to bring hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm going to try to help you grow your business. Don't pay me a dime. And I think over time, we'll be able to build something pretty special here. I've got a really good business model in place, doing a lot of good things on a very small scale. And I know that we can scale it up into something much more substantive. And it's kind of what's gone on over the past decade here as we've grown Sunrise from an organization that just used personal capital to buy deals one-off, and then some individual deals with friends and family capital, JV structure, and then ultimately more formal fund structure starting in 2017. We're now on Fund 3, and it's kind of what's led me to where we're at today.
Okay. Yeah, I like how you explain that natural evolution, because that's kind of where I'm at right now. Recently did a deal with one of my first investors, and I kind of see that as a natural progression, having those kind of JV deals and then maybe some friends piling on and go into that fund structure. So how long did it take for y'all to do that, to eventually get to that fund structure?
About 4 years. Deals beget deals, investors beget investors, exactly as you're saying. And so long as you do what you say you're going to do along the way, scale just becomes a little bit more organic, as opposed to putting a square peg in a round hole and trying to force feed a business model and scale as quickly as possible. That can work for some, but the likes of Uber often go public with negative P&Ls. And it's not something that we're willing to do, right? From my perspective, at the outset, I'd rather grow prudently, have cash flow along the way, and just build organically, if you will.
Okay, got it. Another thing too, so I currently flip vacant land, and I feel like there's this really strong demand for mobile home lots. And I feel like part of it's possibly coupled with this lure of the tiny home movement and people saying, why do I have to have a mortgage? I could just have it all paid off at once. So do you feel like y'all are also seeing that increase in demand for your entire communities?
Without fail. There is an exorbitant demand for affordable housing in this country. There has always been a need for affordable housing, and it continues to get larger and larger year over year. Our population continues to grow. The gap between the rich and poor, unfortunately, continues to increase. The stratification between the socioeconomic levels in our society continues to be compressed, meaning that middle class continues to be squeezed down, and more move into the upper class and more move into the lower class. And for that reason, that demand for affordable housing is just massive and continues to grow on an annual basis. And in our little niche of mobile home parks, it's interesting because that massive demand is juxtaposed by the stagnant supply. There's not a substantive new supply of mobile home parks coming online. Can drone on about why that's the case, but it creates some very unique supply and demand imbalances in the marketplace.
Yeah, that's definitely what I've experienced. I was working on 23 acres that I was trying to convert to like a mobile home park, and I was told immediately by contractors and engineering firms that this county will just not allow that. And then across the state, same thing. Basically, every county, like, we don't want that stuff going on. No.
Yeah, no, there's really, I would say, two main reasons why that is the case. The first reason is largely due to the Nimby Syndrome, not in my backyard, for folks that are unaware of that acronym. The consensus, the general consensus across the population is that folks would not want to live immediately juxtaposed to a mobile home park. If you own a single family residential subdivision, or you're developing a subdivision in the immediate vicinity, and then right next to it somebody's trying to newly construct a mobile home park, irrespective of how phenomenal that infrastructure of that mobile home park is and how beautiful those manufactured homes are, as opposed to the old rundown dirty trailers, irrespective of how beautiful that community is going to be, there are going to be those residents in the single family subdivision who convey that that's going to adversely affect their property values, and they don't want that constructed. So that's reason number one, the Nimby Syndrome. All those single family residential folks will come down to the city council meeting with their torches and their pitchforks and say, hey, no new mobile home parks here. The second reason is that it really doesn't pencil from the city council's perspective, from the municipality's perspective. If I were to go to any municipality across the country and say, hey, do you guys have a need for new affordable housing? Invariably, everyone will say yes. No doubt about it. Yes, I need new affordable housing. I mean, please help me solve this riddle. And I'll say, great. And boy, do I got a solution for you. I'm going to go build you a new mobile home park. They'll say, hold on, not here, bud. We don't want that to happen. One, because the Nimby Syndrome, it's just tough to push that through with the residents. But most importantly, from the municipality's perspective, is it really doesn't pencil. A mobile home park, there's often a lot of homes in a fairly small parcel of land. And in each of those individual 3-bed, 2-bath homes, there might be 2-3 kids that live in that respective home. So on a fairly small parcel of land, you might have hundreds of children living there. And that small parcel of land, it's only going to have a certain amount of property tax on an annual basis. And that property tax doesn't go too terribly far when you got to pay, public tuition for 18, hundreds of kids over 18 years. It just doesn't really pencil from the municipality's perspective. It's very, very difficult to newly construct affordable housing. So you just don't really see mobile home parks coming out of the ground. A handful of them are built on an annual basis across the entire country, and more are actually torn down and redeveloped into a higher and better use on an annual basis than are actually newly constructed out of the ground. So a very, very unique supply and demand imbalance in the asset class.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's helpful insight. I know that I read through your bio on website that you had basically systemized the process of building and tracking relationships with these mobile home park brokers. And that's like obviously one of your main sources of getting deals. So could you go into that a little bit more about how you went about doing that, systemizing the process?
Yeah, sure. So, when I came to Kev, basically trying to add as much value as possible. How can I help scale this respective business? What value can I add? In my 20s, I'd worked for a couple of modest-sized organizations and helped them scale. My most previous position was I was a 6th person on board at a small business that ultimately grew up to over 50 employees, valuation over $50 million, and ultimately went full cycle. So helping small business get fairly large, put systems and processes in place, et cetera. And knew that I could do that here as well. We always hang our hat on off-market direct-to-owner transactions. It's what our core competency is. Prior to my arrival, Kev, back in the day, he's been an active real estate investor his entire adult life. He used to do single-family stuff, and it had basically gone off-market direct-to-owner to roll up about 125 single-family homes in his mid-20s. And that off-market direct-to-owner piece is paramount to what we do. But when you're rolling out that business model, it takes your personal time to do that. Often it takes some personal time to do so. There's really two things that need to happen in order to make an off-market transaction occur, especially in the commercial real estate sector. One, you need to be able to build rapport with the owner of that asset. And then two, you need to touch that owner when he either needs or wants to sell. In commercial real estate, as long as that asset's cash flowing, a lot of these guys, they'll own it for 10, 20, 30 years, long time, especially in the mobile home park space. A lot of mom and pop legacy style owners, they don't have to sell the deal. Sometimes folks have to sell a deal because the term of the debt is ending and they need to get out of it, or they need to wrap up a fund or sell an individual deal, specific syndication, these sorts of things, partnership dissolution, et cetera. If it may be a have to sell, but sometimes it's just, I want to sell because, I'm 60 and I'm trying to retire, et cetera, whatever the reason is. Those are the two things you must do: build rapport and then touch him when he either needs to, wants to sell. So if you had all the time in the world and time were not an option, I would be able to build that rapport with innumerable amounts of owners of assets. But at some point, there aren't enough hours in the day for me personally to do that, or Kevin personally to do that. Therefore, we have to begin delegating out that ability to build that rapport with those owners over time. I would convey that what you're referring to is what we consider our broker initiative. We've really got three main ways that we buy deals: one, cold call campaigns; two, direct mail; and then three, our broker initiative. And personally, our personal time is often best spent on the phone directly with owners. And if you're just getting started, you might reap some of the more rewards from direct mail and cold call campaigns, because you can, until you fill that calendar. Just in advance of us jumping on here, we were talking about the amount of time that you have on the calendar and filling slots and things of this nature. Once your calendar is slammed and you have 0 minutes to continue to reach out to additional owners to build rapport, well, then you need to delegate that out to somebody else. And our broker initiative is an organic process that we've created. As they say, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. And we built up a very substantive mobile home park database and had a lot of inbound traffic, but we didn't have the ability to build rapport personally with every single one of those individuals. And we began to have to scale it and delegate some of that out. So long story short, the broker initiative high level is as follows. We're trying to leverage a local broker in a modest size, more, I would say secondary and tertiary markets is where this works best, to delegate that ability to build rapport in what I would consider to be more of a good old boy network than me calling as a Yankee or some guy from out of state in Florida to build rapport with somebody for the first time. From a commercial real estate broker's perspective, what do they need to do to make a transaction happen? What do they care about? Everybody's always going to do what's in their best interest. All they want to do is see a closed transaction so that they can get a paycheck at closing and feed their family. In order to do so, they need to do three things. One, they need to find the deal. Oftentimes that means researching local deals in the immediate vicinity and ultimately then databasing that owner, finding out who owns that deal, et cetera. Then they need to reach out to him, build rapport, convince him to sell. And then three, they need to find a buyer on the back end. And once they do all three of those things, then they can feed their family. Well, our broker initiative, it's very compelling from the broker's perspective because we're already doing two of those three things. When we're creating off-market transactions, the very first step of the process is to build a database all the assets, and then hit the list. So in order to, go buy deals, what we'll do is we'll find an MSA and say, hey, do we want to buy deals in this MSA? If the answer is yes, then we'll find every mobile home park that we'd like to buy in that specific MSA. Then we'll find the LLC that owns that mobile home park. Then we'll find the individual that owns the LLC that owns that mobile home park. Then we'll find the personal information, the email address, phone number, all that sort of stuff, the physical address of the individual that owns the LLC that owns that mobile home park. And that is very important information because then we just continuously reach out to him over and over and over to build rapport and ultimately touch him when he either needs or wants to sell. So what we do is we basically get that information. We have all that owner information already, and we'll then, as opposed to us going and calling those owners in that specific MSA, once we've exhausted all of the time that we have on our calendar, if we have no ability to do that, we can delegate some of this out to a local broker in the vicinity. So we'll research and underwrite all the local brokers in the vicinity and find out who's got deep roots, who's been there 10, 20, 30 years, who's a generational broker. Their mom did it, their dad did it, their grandfather's been involved. They might, they have to have had some commercial real estate experience as well, as opposed to just doing residential transactions. And we'll reach out to them and say, hey, bud, yet again, I've got an offer that you can't refuse. You need three things to happen to make a deal work. I'm going to solve two of those problems for you. I've already found the deal. I've already researched all the information, and I'm the buyer on the back end. All you've got to do is reach out to this guy, convince him to sell. I'll buy the deal. I'll pay your commission. Brokers are always protected, and we'll do some business together over time. And if you do this across a lot of different markets, let's say that I've only got 15 mobile home parks in a modest sized MSA in Indiana that I want to buy. And I give this XYZ broker 15 leads, and I do that same thing in 10, 20, 50, call it 15 different markets. Well, now all of a sudden I got 225 leads that are working on my behalf with local guys who are running the old boy network, who can continuously build that rapport with folks over time and then reach out when that owner either needs or wants to sell. So that's another way to continuously supplement the deal flow that you've already been able to build via cold call campaigns, direct mail, all those sorts of things. So it's been something that's been effective for us. We like it. It's interesting to see how deeply the roots run in some of the more secondary and tertiary markets. I mean, we've on occasion gone to local brokers in the vicinity and said, hey, give them the pitch, whatever. And then ultimately, after they agree to work with us, we basically require them to do certain things. But once they agree to work with us, we then give them a list of whatever, 15 leads. He'll look at that list and he, oh man, I actually know 2 guys on this list, or I know 3 guys on this list. I didn't know that he owned this mobile home park, but he owns this retail building over here, this office building, down the road. Oftentimes in every single local small MSA throughout the country, there's a Donald Trump of Columbus, Indiana. There's a local guy that just knows everything about that local market, and he might own a lot of different stuff in that really small little area. And when that's the case, some of these local brokers that have deep roots know those folks and can serve as that supplemental relationship builder on your behalf. So that's in a nutshell, that's the broker initiative, man.
Okay. So as of today, what's the allocation between deals brought in through brokers versus your own direct mail and all that stuff?
Still vast majority of stuff that we do is off-market direct to owner. Man, it's been multiple years since we have bought a deal directly from an industry broker. In the broker initiative that I just referred to, I'm not talking about specific mobile home park industry brokers. This broker initiative tactic typically works better, with brokers that I wouldn't even consider to be specialists in the mobile home park industry. Why? Because guys that are truly professionals in this niche, or they've got a list of buyers for mobile home parks that's 500, 600, 700 deep, and it just continues to get larger and longer and longer every single year. So, if I approach that guy, it's not going to hold the same weight as if I approach somebody that is less of a specialist in the industry, but has significantly more roots in that local MSA. The last time that we brought something from a like industry broker, it's been multiple years. We've had some broker initiative deals come through from like local guys who've continued to build rapport and ultimately have been able to feed us transactions, but even still very negligible, I would say, compared to the overwhelming amount of deal flow that comes from direct mail and cold call campaigns. That's still our primary source of transactions, even to this day. Last that I checked, it was over 85% of our deals are off market direct to owner, and all the deals that we've done recently subsequent to putting that together are, again, off market direct owner deals. So it's probably closer to the 90-ish or a little bit above that percent range now. So that's where we're at.
Okay. And I know we briefly hit on it earlier about development of new manufactured home communities. So how often do you all actually consider that?
It's not something that we do. In terms of core competency, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We're going to continue to do what we do. It's very rare to have new mobile home parks developed, and that's all well and good. It's an arduous process to do so. And for all the reasons and the hurdles that we just outlined earlier, we choose not to do it. Our investment thesis is such that we require assets to have cash flow on day one. So when you're developing any given asset, it's a more risky endeavor, much more of an opportunistic real estate investment. We much prefer light value add or core plus style investments that have cash flow in place from day one, so that we can ensure that we can ride out any recession, depressionary environment. Because truly nobody knows when that next recession is going to occur. Who could have possibly thought that COVID would have popped up and thrown a black swan event in the spring of last year? So we want that cash flow in place from day one. It's why, the primary podcast we have is called Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow. It's because it's the primary metric that we underwrite when acquiring any respective asset. We need to ensure that it has sufficient cash flow to cover itself, irrespective of how the economy ebbs and flows during the holding period.
Okay, so what kind of cap rates are you usually looking for?
Great question, and that has modified in due time. I'd love to make 2 points here. One is that we typically like to acquire deals that have a little bit of meat on the bone and have some value add characteristics. Like I said, either light value add or core plus deals. On the mobile home park side, we're much more light value add transactions. On our parking side, we also do parking lot and parking garage acquisitions. That's more of a core plus style investment. But because there's a value add play involved in our acquisitions, the cap rate immediately acquisition becomes a secondary metric, a little bit less important than ultimately what is this asset going to do over the long term? How much cash flow is this asset going to throw off year over year over year over year after we've acquired the transaction? It's even more important to view acquisitions from that perspective when you're going off and acquiring deals off market direct to owner. Why? Because a lot of these mom and pop guys, they don't have the most sophisticated financial systems in place. They might not even have professional property management software. They might be coming to you with a loose leaf pamphlet saying this is the rent roll, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And for that reason, if I looked exclusively at what is the cap rate at acquisition based on historical T12, we would have passed on a lot of transactions that ultimately have made our investors a lot of money over time. So cap rate at acquisition from our perspective can be a little bit fuzzy because it's most assuredly not a stabilized cap rate. But just in general, from a stabilized perspective, cap rates historically, 10 years ago, you used to be able to throw a dart and find, maybe an 8, 9, 10 cap pretty easily. Today, that doesn't exist. It's much more difficult to go out and find deals, especially stabilized deals that have cap rates north of, I would say, 6.5%. And the premier assets have been compressed significantly beneath that. Green Street puts out some pretty solid data on an ongoing basis. And the most recent data that they put out was here in early September. And they conveyed that the highest grade communities, both on the apartment side and on the manufactured housing side, are both sub four. So it was like 3.9 and 3.8 respectively on cap rates on stabilized grade A Class A deals, which is unbelievable. And that's really not where we play. We're just unwilling to play in that area. There are some firms out there that have a little bit lower weighted average cost of capital, and maybe they can make that pencil, and maybe they're waiting for that 5, 10, 20 years to go by where the outsized same store NOI growth pays off from their perspective. But we like a little bit more margin of safety right at acquisition. It is true that the debt is exceptional right now. We just got a quote on a $17 million deal we've got that we're looking at that's, debt's coming in at 2.7 out of the gate. I mean, that's pretty exceptional with a lot of years of interest only right out of the gate. So you can make some of those deals work if the financing is in place. But anyway, sufficient in terms of where the cap rates are today. They've come down significantly over time.
Okay, got it. Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned the as is the cap rate at acquisition. I've always been taught to kind of really acquire it based on what your expected stabilized cap rate's going to be after you implement your stuff, which is obviously hard to back into when you don't know necessarily, like, is the market overly saturated already? Do I really know that I'll reach 90% stabilized occupancy within 1 to 2 years, stuff like that,
Yeah.
So
no, I hear you. It is tough. And some of that is fuzzy. Some of it is difficult. Anytime that an investor is receiving a pro forma from a deal specific syndication, and that pro forma is, granular with not only the number of dollars, but also has the cents on the end. Only one thing is certain. It's either going to be better or it's going to be worse than projected. That it's never going to work out exactly as that pro forma sits. Like any projection that we share, I can promise you one thing, it's not going to be exactly what this says. It's going to be a better or worse. It's impossible over a 10-year horizon or longer to gauge with a fine-tooth comb exactly what that is going to look like. It's why you've got to have a little fudge factor there. It's why you've got to buy with a margin of safety to ensure that when Murphy's Law hits, what can go wrong will, you'll be able to ride out those periods to ensure that, again, you have sufficient cash flow to ride out those recessionary periods if the asset's not performing to your original expectations. I had another thought there. Golly, I lost my train of thought. My sincerest apologies, but
That's okay. Just slightly changing subjects. You mentioned previously, like somewhere in Indiana. I'm just wondering though, I know that for like the perfect markets and multifamily, for example, you would draw a smiley face with a tongue sticking out and it would start from Texas and go up to North Carolina and go down to Florida. Is that similar for mobile home communities, or is it really nationwide?
Well played. No. Well played. I would say I'll give you a couple things here. I'll give you kind of mobile home park side and then also on the parking side. So on the mobile home park side, largely, yes, we're tracking similar metrics to that of the multifamily space. Just broad brushstrokes here. On the mobile home park side, we target the Smile States, like you're referring to, the Southeast largely, as well as the Midwest. Why? Massive demographic tailwind. Folks moving the northern colder climates down to the southeast over the next decade. And for that reason, those climates will likely outperform. A lot of those MSAs that you're referencing there will likely outperform over the next decade. And then secondarily in the Midwest, just hard working blue collar folks in the Midwest. We've had a lot of success, and historically in the mobile home park sector, the Midwest has performed very well. Just again, hard working blue collar folks that pay on time in full every month like clockwork, and will continue to buy in those markets where we have very sound collections and outperformance across the board. You know, if we're going to avoid areas, it's largely going to be in more tenant-friendly states, often coastal stuff, avoiding more rent control environments, things of that nature. But just broad brushstrokes on where we're at in mobile home park land. And then on parking, it can be a little bit more specific to MSA, dependent upon what you're seeking, what you're targeting in the parking side of the business. We typically say out of the top tier cities, the Manhattans, the Chicagos, the LAs, and maybe one step beneath that, the secondary cities, the gateway cities that are continuously growing. Just a couple off the top, Austin's, Raleigh, Durham's, places like that. They're on the cusp of growth where the underlying land value is continuing to increase. Those are areas where we're targeting parking.
Okay. And say if I wanted to find a parking deal for you, would it really need to be right in the, Austin or Raleigh proper and no longer like a secondary, tertiary type of market location?
Well, it just, here's the thing. It all is based on the numbers from our perspective. So parking is a beautiful business because oftentimes a parking lot is the least valuable zoning in the downtown MSA. And usually the underlying land is extremely valuable. Why? Just logically, if somebody is willing to pay me just for the right to stand on my parcel of land, then it's very likely in a high value environment. It's either in a downtown urban CBD, a high traffic tourist destination, high demand drivers, many different ways. But if you wanted to bring us a deal per se, you're doing a lot of different land transactions. The parking assets we're going to be interested in, they have to be paid parking from day one. So it's not something that is on the fringe, on the cusp, on the outskirts, that doesn't have any paid parking whatsoever today. It's going to need to be creating some semblance of income from day one, but similar to what our strategy has always historically been of going off market direct to owner, buy from mom and pop owners. Parking is a very fragmented niche. It's a completely blue ocean strategy. Nobody's out there doing what we're doing, certainly not at scale to the degree to which we're doing it. And we're still looking for those mom and pop kind of guys. There are some more sophisticated operators in the space, but there's a litany of mom and pop operators. IBIS World put out some data that said that well over half of the folks are mom and pop operators, meaning it's an extremely fragmented niche where over half of them, the only parking asset they own is that one individual deal. So again, mom and pop through and through. Anytime you see what do they call those honor boxes where somebody's sliding in dollar bills into that honor box? Somebody's probably seen that, whether a couple of years ago, you're growing up, those sorts of things. Or anybody that's taking cash in any way, shape, or form. If there's an attendant there sitting underneath an umbrella, things of that nature, you can rest assured that not every one of those dollars is actually going over to the owner at the end of the day. That guy's definitely taking a little bit of that in his pocket and sliding out of there. It's called slippage. So those are the things that we look for. Some of those inefficiencies where we can go in and automate it, bring in a better operator, maximize the value of the asset, but it has to be an income producing asset from day one. So anyway, just a little bit of insight there.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So I guess kind of to answer my question, it wouldn't be something on the edge of town, kind of secondary or like a suburb. You obviously would need something that's in demand. I think that part mentally is just a mental block of, personally, I've always been on the tertiary market side of things because I've been, I guess, a little intimidated by the, like, going straight to the core of the city, and how competitive would that be, and how difficult would that be to get a deal there. But I guess if you source it correctly, then I don't know. What do you think? Is it just really a mind game, a mindset issue?
It's all about the numbers from our perspective. I'll give you an example. This is a small deal, but I mean, to your point about being in more modest size MSAs, this is not a tertiary environment, but we acquired a deal in Wilmington, North Carolina. Again, off-market, direct-to-owner, mom-and-pop owner. It's a $700,000 transaction. So this is not a multi-gajillion-dollar deal. We sent out a piece of direct mail to a parking lot that we wanted to buy. It's in Wilmington, North Carolina. It is on a hard signalized corner. So it's a nice parcel of land. It had been generating about $30,000 on an annual basis. It was owned by a doctor who was in the vicinity, who was just looking to buy some real estate to diversify his portfolio. But he certainly wasn't a professional operator. His son was actually operating that parking lot on an ongoing basis. So we knew that there was some inefficiency there. We didn't know the degree to which the inefficiency existed, but he responded to us and was interested in potentially selling the asset. He said, "Hey, bud, you know, how much would you be potentially interested in selling that for?" He gave us a number that was about $800,000. Well, based on a $30,000 income, it's not something that we're interested in doing. However, what we can do is go find other operators in the immediate vicinity and kind of gauge what that lot would be able to do in terms of demand, and find out if somebody would be interested in signing a lease with us over an extended period of time. And after doing an RFP, request for proposal, we had a couple of different operators come back and offer us a certain amount of cash on an ongoing basis to become our tenant, where they lease the land from us. And the best option for us was to sign a $72,000 lease on an annual basis with a 3% rent escalator from that point forward. So knowing how much money we'd be able to make on that respective asset, we're able to go back to the owner and say, "Hey, buddy, we'll pay you $700,000 for this asset." It was like $690 something, which from his perspective is great. He's basically selling it at 5 cap. He likes that. From our perspective, it's beautiful because we're buying it in an unlevered 10 cap in a beautiful downtown urban CBD. The asset's not only, parking asset, but it's also zoned mixed use up to 8 stories, where we could put retail on the first floor and build something up 8 stories if it ultimately does become a scenario where there's a higher and better use of that particular property. But in a nutshell, those type of deals exist. That mom and pop style of asset exists out there in the parking industry, and it's not necessarily in the suburban area or on the outskirts. Again, that's downtown, right on a hard signalized corner of downtown Wilmington.
Okay, that's good. That's really helpful with hearing the example there. So, before you buy an asset, when you're underwriting, say, a parking lot or mobile home park, I feel like you're probably doing some due diligence and understanding market saturation and stuff like that. So how do you determine that, like, whether or not it's really there's just too many people here and it's going to be hard to increase occupancy and all that?
I'll start by saying that on the mobile home park side of the business, whenever we're acquiring an asset, obviously there's a massive demand for affordable housing through this country. There's truly an affordable housing crisis. So usually the demand side is not it's not going to be a substantive drawback to the acquisition. The way that we always test it in advance is by putting out a test ad. So you're going to find one of two different things when you put out a test ad. You run a local ad basically saying, "Hey, mobile home park for rent or lease option, if you will, 3-bed, 2-bath, whatever the market rates are that you're seeking to achieve on that respective acquisition," and you wait for the inbound response. One of two things is going to occur. This has been our experience. Either one is just dead silence, eerily silent. You're not going to hear anything. That is very, very rare. More often than not, you have an exorbitant amount of inbound demand from folks saying, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this is available at this respective price," because folks are yearning for that affordable style housing. It just doesn't, that additional new supply of affordable housing doesn't often come online. That new stock doesn't often come online. And when it does, it's usually snapped up pretty quick. So that's usually the case in our MHP side of the business. So anyway, I hope that insight helps.
Okay. And then on the parking side, I mean, it's just, I guess it's kind of self-explanatory. It's like, well, that there's only so many places to park and that's it, right?
A couple of things here regarding parking. One of the arguments against parking that folks will often pose if they're unfamiliar with the business and they're wondering about whether or not it might be a reasonable asset class to entertain over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, they're gauging the supply and demand economics of the space. And anytime that we're vetting a given asset class, we're looking for favorable long-term macroeconomics. I want to know that there is a higher demand for this asset than the new supply coming online. Because what that does is it creates outsized same-store NOI growth and better compound interest over the long term. That's what we're doing. We've got that in mobile home parks. Feel free to go check out all the information. And the parking side, over the last, I would hesitate to give you the specific years, but census data over the past decade, rough shot, again, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but per census data, the supply of parking has gone down 7% over that duration of time. Why is that the case? It is because over time, parking gets redeveloped into a higher and better use. As the demand for parking, or as the demand in that immediate CBD increases, that parking lot that's a parcel of parking today is ultimately going to be redeveloped into a higher and better use years and years hence. One of the arguments against parking is what's going to happen with autonomous vehicles, AI, things of this nature. How's Uber and autonomous vehicles going to affect parking years down the road? Per all of the data, when you get into the nitty gritty and research all of the data, it is very unlikely that the demand for parking is going to diminish for the next decade or beyond. Autonomous vehicles, AI, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It is going to occur at some point. But in order for that to materially adversely affect an investment in a parking parcel, it's going to take decades for that to adversely affect us. All the data conveys that the demand for parking will continue to increase through 2030, and at that point may flatten off, but won't be materially adversely affected for 15 years or beyond. Long story short, we feel like there's nobody who knows more about the demand for parking. Nobody knows more about autonomous vehicles, et cetera, than the founder of Uber himself. And ultimately, when I'm going to butcher his last name, Travis Kalanick, I can't remember his last name, my apologies. But ultimately, when he left the firm, the very first thing he did immediately upon leaving the firm was he rolled out a $150 million fund to go out and buy parking lots, because he knows how the demand for parking is going to be changing over time. And the highest and best use of those parcels is going to be changing over time. It is true that the operators, parking lot operators, the people who physically operate the business, they're going to be adversely affected. But the owners of the real estate, so long as you buy good locations, they're going to be in an exceptional position. For example, we just bought a property on Clearwater Beach. It's a phenomenal asset, a beautiful piece of property, and it's got an exceptional amount of demand to park there today. But 10, 20, 30 years down the road, if for whatever reason, technology changes such that parking demand dwindles in any way, shape, or form, so long as you buy in a good location, Clearwater Beach is the #1 beach in the country. And it is very likely in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road, that parcel of land is going to be worth more than it is today. So that's the thought process. It is a cash flowing covered land play, both mobile home parks and parking. We've always historically operated our mobile home parks like a parking lot. We don't like to own the homes. We just want to rent out the land to the homeowners who own their own homes. And then on the parking side, again, a cash flowing covered land play. The cash flow covers the carrying costs associated with the asset. And then the land play suggests that so long as you buy in good locations, the underlying land value will continue to increase years and years hence. So that's the philosophy.
Okay. And I forgot to ask, are y'all usually, I think actually it's on your website, your holding period, is that usually just indefinite as long as possible? Or do you ever use like a 5-year holding period?
Hey, the only time we put in a terminal cap rate is if we need to send out a pro forma. I'd prefer to hold these assets forever. For those unaware, a terminal cap rate is what you put on the back end of any transaction, just so you can give 5 or 10 year projections, right, to investors and things of that nature. But we know that they're not making any more of these mobile home parks. So we operate a buy, improve, and hold style fund. And because we operate in assets that have very favorable long-term macroeconomics, we feel that they will outperform and continue to outperform, and that outperformance will continue to grow over the years. And once we've found an asset that we know, that we like, that we trust, we would like to hold it forever. We've gone full cycle on a lot of deals, and that's great. It's nice to be able to sell some deals and send a nice chunk of capital back to investors, but it creates problems. It creates tax problems for everybody involved. And then the investor, he's got to go find another deal that's going to either meet or exceed the rate of return that he had been getting on his previous asset. It actually needs to be better because, one, he's paid the tax man, and two, there's a cash drag between when he sells that one asset and he's able to put that capital to work in the next transaction. So it's something that's inefficient. There's a reason Warren Buffett is the most wealthy investor in the history of mankind, and he's built from scratch a business up to $600 billion. It's because he never sells. He never pays tax. He's never paid capital gains on any of those assets. He just buys and holds forever and allows that same store NOI growth to continue to compound over time. That's what we do in the real estate sector.
Okay, so do you ever, to return capital to investors, sometimes you ever just do like refis? Is that a tool you use?
Yeah, exactly. That's what we do. It's a buy, improve, refinance, and hold strategy. So again, light value add projects. I'll give you an example. We bought a property in Mississippi for $2.6 million in December of 2018. Here we are in September of 2021. So we've owned it almost 3 years now. We are going through a refinance process where we've been able to increase the value of the property fairly precipitously. The bank just came back with an appraisal at 5.2. So we'll be able to refinance that asset, pull all the capital back out, send it back to investors, and then they stay in the deal, as opposed to some syndicators who will ultimately refinance or sell that asset and cut the investors out of the deal. Our funds provide a preferred return to investors, and all profits above the pref are split 70-30, where once we've returned all of the capital, they continue to receive that split 70-30 as we progress. So that's the philosophy. It's buy, improve, refinance, and hold. And we've been fortunate to be able to do that through and through.
Okay. And each time you're raising capital, are you ever raising like a blind pool where they don't know which asset it's going to be used for? Or is it pretty clear, like we just got this one single asset that we want to raise capital for? How's that work? Or is it a combination of both?
No, we've done both, but today we do operate in the fund structure, which is more of I would consider it a semi-blind pool. How do I mean? We have some seed assets, and we typically have some assets that we've targeted in advance of closing the next transaction. So there's some visibility for investors. They know what they're getting themselves into to a degree, but we're still rolling the fund. It's a rolling close fund where we're simultaneously raising capital and going out and buying deals. So there is some semblance of the investor not knowing exactly which assets are going to be in the fund. Again, some benefits and some drawbacks between doing a fund versus a deal-specific syndication. On that deal-specific syndication, you might go hit that home run or go hit that grand slam, but unfortunately, some of those deals are going to strike out, and investors might lose some money along the way. The more deals you put into the fund, the more likely you are to revert back to the mean and get rather close to the projections that you'd outlined along the way. So we prefer that certainty, more certainty along the way. That's one piece that we like. Secondarily, in the fund structure, it provides you some economies of scale. You can often get a little bit better debt by having the fund structure. And then in addition to that, in this very, very competitive seller's market, oftentimes having the fund structure, cash in hand, ready to close transaction can be the difference between getting a deal and not getting a deal. Putting together a PSA where there's a financing contingency versus one that has none, and we're buying it all cash, again, can be the difference between getting a deal and not getting a deal. So that's why we prefer the fund structure.
Okay, that's really helpful. Oh yeah, and I was also wondering, like my background's kind of more the finance, traditional like stock hedge fund and like financial security hedge fund type of things. And I know that that has been obviously largely under attack, especially since the 0809 crisis. And I say that because regulatory requirements to be a fund manager has just become increasingly more strict, to where it's like not worth it. And a lot of fund managers are converting to family offices and just saying, I'm not a fund. You can't regulate me anymore. It's my money now. So on the real estate side of things, though, outside of the financial security world per se, is there still an increased, tightened regulatory hurdle you have to pass, or what's that look like?
Um, I wouldn't say that it is an exorbitantly difficult bridge to gap. When you're raising capital via, we use Reg D 506C offerings available exclusively to accredited investors. Whenever you're bringing in capital from anybody, doesn't matter if it's accredited investor, non-accredited investor, friends and family, family office, institutional, doesn't matter. It is a heavy burden to pull in capital, and when you do so, the onus that what you put on your own shoulders should weigh heavier than what the SEC puts on you, from my perspective. But nevertheless, you need to bring on folks that can help you ensure that you're playing within the boundaries outlined by the SEC. That means, one, bringing aboard an absolutely stellar securities attorney. Before you raise a dime of private capital from anybody, you need to bring on a sterling attorney who's been through this and has helped put together a litany of different syndications. You don't want this to be the guy where it's his first syndication. That's a 0% chance. You want the guy that's done billions of dollars, so that when you put together your PPM, your operating agreement, all your respective docs, your sub-agreement, all that sort of stuff, it is bulletproof. Unwilling to do it any other way. And then secondarily, you're going to want to take some additional steps to ensure that you're doing everything in your power to dot all the I's, cross all the T's from the securities perspective. For example, when you're raising capital in a Reg D 506C offering, you have the ability to, everybody needs to be an accredited investor. And there's a couple of different ways that a sponsor can vet the accreditation of the partners in the fund. One, and in no particular order, right? One is that they prove to you that they're an accredited investor by sending that information directly to you. You vet that they're accredited, you either check the box yes or no, and then you're good to go. On the flip side, we prefer to bring aboard a third party to vet the accreditation of all the investors on our behalf. From our perspective, this adds an additional layer of security, so that if the SEC ever were to come back and say, hey, is everybody accredited? We just give them a list of letters provided by a third party that says yes, as opposed to them having to sift through all the documents provided to us directly from investors. That additional layer of hurdle, maybe from the investor's perspective, and hassle of them gathering all the paperwork and dealing with a third party, from our perspective, is more than worth it. It's one tiny, small, short-term pain when dealing with a very long-term buy and hold period. And it should provide some assurance to everybody involved that we are making everybody go through the same exact process, and we're bringing aboard a professional third party to do this on our behalf. Again, these are just some of the things that you should think through and certainly do if and when you choose to move forward in a much more formal structure as you continue to scale.
Okay, that's helpful. And in terms of finding new investors, I've seen Ashcroft Capital doing like just PPC campaigns for their multifamily deals. Is that something y'all do, or what do you feel like is the most effective way for you to find new investors?
I would say first and foremost, it's just the golden rule. Do what you say you're going to do. Grow organically. Start out small. If you don't have at least a handful of $1 million in your cell phone right now in your Rolodex, you probably shouldn't be going out and raising capital. You start in your immediate circle of influence, and you continue to grow from there. And usually when you do that, you leverage the golden referral, golden chain, that those referrals over time continue to come. And then beyond that, it's trying to ensure that your reputation is clean. The truth is, it takes a lifetime to build a reputation and just a matter of moments to wreck it in its entirety. So build that reputation. It's not going to happen overnight, but keep it sterling, continue to build, continue to grow, continue to build that track record. The proof is in the pudding. And so long as you continue to care to struggle and work at it, you'll be able to build that what I would consider to be that investor list over time.
Okay. And then in terms of like updating them or just keeping track of all of the investors involved, you use a certain software or system to do that?
Yeah, we use a couple of different things. I mean, you're in the podcast world, so we do the same thing. We've got a couple of podcasts that we host, and just on our outbound weekly email flow and things like that, we have a CRM system that we use, Infusionsoft, just an easy way to just keep touch on, with folks over time. But once folks become partners in our fund, we bring them into our investor management software portal. That's an IMS, just software that we use to communicate directly with our partners on an ongoing basis. It's where they get all their annual K1s, their quarterly reports, their ongoing monthly private podcasts, right? You know, we do a lot of podcasting. Folks are accustomed to hearing stuff from us via the medium of audio. So we'll go ahead and do a private podcast on a monthly basis, post all of that information directly to their private portal, and just walk through 3 topics. We always talk about housekeeping items. You know, if their K1s are posted, we'll let them know, just a reminder, friendly reminder. Again, housekeeping items. 2 is corporate topics. What's the biggest thing going on in the crazy mobile home park universe this month? And then 3, what's an operational update? What's going on each individual asset? We'll talk about the physical and economic occupancy. How is every asset in the fund doing? These sorts of things. But that's how we communicate with our folks over time.
Okay. So if I was a potential investor, what would be the typical return profiles? Say if I wanted to invest in actually mobile home parks versus parking lots, or are they similar profiles?
Well, I'll give you a little bit more granular piece. So fund wide, you know, our structure, again, preferred return, then there's a 70-30 split over and above that. Our goal, as mentioned, is to return that capital via refinance proceeds as opposed to selling all the assets. You know, we've been fortunate historically to be able to do that in a fairly reasonable duration. But in terms of return profile on the individual assets, we've been very fortunate historically to be able to net out average annualized returns to partners of over 20% on an annual basis. It's not to say that every deal is going to be able to do that moving forward, but we've been very fortunate to be able to knock that out historically. And especially here in the fund structure, probably not every deal, right, is going to be able to do that moving forward perpetually. I wouldn't envision that occurring. But so long as we hit a couple doubles, triples along the way, and maybe we have a layer or 2, that's why we revert back to the mean over time. In terms of the discrepancies amongst the 2 different asset classes, usually on our light value add mobile home park style deal, oftentimes there's a subtly less amount of cash flow immediately out of the gate at acquisition. Again, it's a light value add project where we have a couple of different things that we'll need to do to rectify that asset to get it up to stabilize and operating at peak efficiency. So there's that value add component. So usually a little bit less cash flow in the near term, but a healthy amount of equity build up over time by adding that additional value. And then on the parking side, it's much more of a double net or triple net lease style investment, much more core plus. We're right out of the gate. We're typically able to lock in a pretty healthy yield with pretty healthy cash on cash returns over a 5 or 10 year horizon, more on a double or triple net style deal on a very nice parcel of land in a downtown urban CBD or high traffic tourist demand area. So that higher cash flow and then good cash flow, but additional value add along the way, while this kind of covered land play just builds in value years and years hence, it builds a nice a blend for us in the fund.
Okay. Do you have a fund that has both assets in there, or do you have strictly a parking lot fund and a mobile home park fund?
No, it is a fund that allows us to acquire both respective assets. We didn't want to pinhole ourselves to be forced to acquire exclusively one or the other. This is an opportunity to buy both of those types of assets in the same type of fund. Again, it's a nice opportunity to get a little bit of that value add play, but also that cash flow from more of that double triple net style deal in a core plus parking investment along the way.
Okay, that's pretty cool. It's interesting. It's kind of like a blended mutual funds. If you were to think, like, you have some small cap stocks and you have some large cap and medium stock, all in that one fund.
Yep, indeed.
Okay, very nice. Well, I think we've hit all these questions. I have learned a very good amount here. This has been very helpful. If you want our listeners to get in touch with you, what do you think is the best way for them to do that?
I'll say two different things. First, for folks that are gauging kind of mobile home park investing, if it'd be something in which they'd be interested, we put together a free report. It's the Passive Investor's Guide to Mobile Home Park Investing. If you want to go download that for free, head to sunrisecapitalinvestors.com/free report. Again, it's sunrisecapitalinvestors.com/free report. And then for anybody interested in investing alongside Kevin Bupp and our team here at Sunrise Capital Investors, they can go to investwithsunrise.com. Again, investwithsunrise.com. So that's it, Mason.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll be sure to put those links in the show notes as well. But for any diligent investors that have written that down, great, keep it up. And hopefully we'll do this again soon. Thanks again for coming on. This has been great.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Mason.
Sure. All right, that's another episode of Scalable Real Estate Investing. Thank you for tuning in. Please be sure to leave a review and subscribe on whatever channel you're using to listen or watch these episodes. And also be sure to go to scalablerealestateinvesting.com, scroll to the bottom, and fill out the form to sign up for our email. And you could also reach me directly at mason@scalablerealestateinvesting.com. That's MASON@scalablerealestateinvesting.com. If you'd like to get in touch with me to either partner on deals or even be considered to do your own episode on this podcast. Thanks again, and have a great day.